2008. And we're on Anchorage Way in Mattapoisett for this historic occasion, the dedication of the 107-acre Walega-Livingstone Preserve, which will protect forever 107 acres of critical habitat on Grant Island Cove.
Come on down this way.
Members of the Land Trust, representatives of the Buzzards Bay Coalition, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and interested members. We're gathered on this quiet street to celebrate something that the whole town can really be proud of.
So what I've handed out is just an indication of the what we're doing here today, dedicating the Walega-Livingstone Preserve on Grant Island Cove. We're especially thankful. This would have never come about without a grant from the North American Wetlands Conservation Act from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And we're a pretty small land trust, and it's hard for us to put together all the paperwork and everything you need to get a grant like this. So we're really in debt to the Coalition for Buzzards Bay for helping us with this grant, as well as the Mattapoisett Center for Conservation Science, the Mass Environmental Trust, who contributed to the grant application, and the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Project. That's where we get all our maps and everything that we need. And they don't charge us, which is wonderful. It's amazing. So, in any case, what I'd like to do right now is turn it over to Mark, and he can say a few words about, from the Coalition's point of view, why this is an important property, and then we'll ask Wayne to say a few things.
That was Gary Johnson, President of the Mattapoisett Land Trust.
So the Coalition for Buzzards Bay has been involved with this property. I was trying to think back the first time we started talking seriously to Wayne. You might consider that being the start, and that was a very long time ago. But actually, I think it was much earlier before that, because this property has been, I think, on every important priority area map for conservation I've ever seen produced for land conservation in Buzzards Bay, in the Buzzards Bay area. This stretch, Grant Island Cove, is such a remarkably special place for so little of the shoreline having been developed. It's a very small watershed. You can actually, with this property, preserve most of the watershed for one cove, and thereby protect the water quality in the cove. So when we had the chance to help administer the $7 million in oil spill penalty money from the Bouchard oil spill in 2003, it all went to this North American Wetlands Conservation Act program. We took a group of staff from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and state officials around in our boat around the bay. They wanted to see, so what can we save on Buzzards Bay that will help us protect migratory bird habitat primarily, but also water quality in the bay and shellfish beds. And we took them all around. We knew that they would really want to see a lot of what was in Nascatucket Bay, the area in Fairhaven, and over here. But when we pulled into Grant Island Cove, and we had to, our boat draws, you know how shallow Grant Island is, we had to crawl into Grant Island Cove with them. And it was early in the morning, and I remember the two officials, one was from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office in the Midwest, another one was from here in New England, look at each other and say, this is exactly what we have the program for. This is what all this federal money is for. It's for saving places like this. And they were looking directly ahead at West Hill. They were looking at this property when they said that. So from their perspective, this was a shoo-in. All that had to happen was, you know, all the simple stuff like come together with a deal, raise all this money. And so this was one of the largest. The oil spill penalty funds have now saved over 1,200 acres in the Bay watershed. Very close by to here, the NACA funds went to use on Newlands Neck, which is the peninsula just to the east of here. It sticks out into Little Bay, another 100-acre conservation restriction. It went to the field farm 2 years earlier, the 65-acre farm you'll be able to see from the end of, or you all know I'm sure, from the end of this trail. So this pot of money did a lot right in this neighborhood, and that's so great. And so I guess I'll end with thanking Wayne for, I'm sure there were a million times in this process where he was sure we'd never be standing here right now, and stuck with it. And you know, these grant programs and working with nonprofits who are trying to pull together deals while doing big things at the same time is really hard work, and a landowner that sticks with it deserves to be praised, and so thank you. And completely took over this deal and brought it all the way through, and is still carrying it all the way through. And it's so hard to miss all the day-to-day stuff, but Gary's on this stuff every minute, and so and that's that. So I think I'll leave it there and just say this is I think this is the most effective way we're saving Buzzards Bay. When I was pulling in this morning, I think about this neighborhood. I think about in the last 10 to 15 years, think about all the threats we've seen to what might have happened in this stretch of Mattapoisett and Fairhaven Town line. But in the meantime, we've saved Mattapoisett Bay State Reservation, that property at 220 acres in 1998, Field Farm, this, Newlands Neck, the Viveris Farm across the water when you look across the Sconnecut Neck. We were under a lot of threat to seeing this part of the bay change dramatically 15 years ago, and now the dominant land use pattern is conservation in this area. And so I think that's something really to celebrate. So thank you.
It wasn't good the deal.
I want to know a little bit about the history, and really the history starts with my dad, Ted Walega, and in 1943 he moved from Acushnet, where his family had a homestead on a farm, and he was the oldest of 9 children, and got married. In 1943 I was born, and he moved to Mattapoisett. And when he moved to the reason he moved to Mattapoisett was multiple, I'm sure, but he had the opportunity, well, he was an entrepreneur, not knowing what an entrepreneur meant, but he just knew that he wanted to be in business for himself, having worked very hard jobs in the city of New Bedford, and there's one of the more difficult jobs that I heard him talk about was the aerobox, where he worked with these kilns where they poured the vats into bowls and that kind of thing, and every once in a while they would explode, and he actually had a burn mark all the way around his belt, where you had to run for these showers whenever that did happen, and so he paid the price for that in later years with his health. But he was an entrepreneur, and what he lacked in education, he was certainly made up in real street smarts. He was a very wise gentleman who did a lot of good things that would be very difficult to match in a generation. But so when he came here because he wanted to buy. Concerned that he wasn't going to be able to do that because he didn't have the money, and lo and behold, he turned to his wife, my mother, bemoaning the fact that he really thought this was a good deal and he didn't have enough money, and she said, well, if you really want it that badly, she literally went under the pillow and handed him enough money to put down for deposit. That's how he got started, and I just can't take my hat off to him for having done all of what he did. So shortly thereafter, he partnered up with his attorney, Edward Livingston, which he developed a friendship with, and they decided to own this property together. And so so that goes probably back about 50 years. And anybody who knows about this area knows that this is a very problematic area. And I'm sure they envisioned some idea of some kind of a development, and that had a lot of stumbling blocks. But in the process, the Livingstons and the Walegas, more than biannually, were out here walking up and down the trails and really just being a party to the beauty of this land. And the Livingstons, Mr. Edward Livingston, who was an attorney who went on to be a judge, has 7 children, and they came and they were a party to the environment and to the ecology, and the whole neighborhood has been able to enjoy what there is to be offered here. And I didn't realize the significance until I heard how very important it was, and maybe I should have known better during our negotiations. But at any rate, it is a very special piece of property, and I know the Livingstons and the Walegas are very, very happy to have their name associated with that, and I'm particularly happy because my dad, not having been a townie, really acted like a townie. He was committed to this town, he served the town, he worked with the town, and he was a member of this town as much as anybody who had lived here all their lives. So to have his name go on into perpetuity and the protection of this land and the enjoyment by other people is a very special for all of us, and I'm very proud to see that taking place. And I'm happy to be a part of this, the whole process of making that happen. Well, thank you very much.
Pierce from Mass Wildlife is here today visiting with us because we're still in the process of negotiating to sell the conservation restriction on this property, including the Ferreira Preserve here, which will mean that this entire land will have double protection. Not only will it be owned by the land trust, but we'll have the state will also have an interest in preserving this land in perpetuity. So we think that's a good way to make sure that nothing ever is going to be done with this parcel. Secondly, I've tried to list everybody, and I think I have, that contributed directly to this acquisition, that restricted funds just made for this. Now, we had a lot of other people, as we were publicizing what we were doing, gave us unrestricted gifts to the land trust also, and I haven't included all of those. But these were gifts that people made specifically so that this land could be protected in perpetuity. And without their help, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So if you're on the list, thank you. And we hope that you'll continue to support our efforts as we continue forward. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hike into the property. And the way we get in there, it's hard to see on the map on the back, but there's actually a cart path. It's a black, gray, or dark gray line that goes in. We're going to go around this house and in, and eventually, as we get in there, we're going to go through a stone wall, and it's quite a ways in, but it's at that point that we go back onto the property that we've acquired, directly in all the way on to the salt marsh. You'll see some interesting things when we go in. About halfway in, you'll see an old foundation and an old well off on the right-hand side. And I'll try to point it out when we get in there. But you have to keep in mind that most of this was pasture land 100 years ago. This is not primeval forest in here. This is old pasture land that's now gone back to woodland. It means that we also maybe don't have as much diversity in terms of flora and fauna as we would like to see. A lot of the native species, and I've looked for example, trillium and things, and I don't see any in here. I didn't see any lady slipper this spring. That's not to say they're not there, but I haven't found any yet. So I think in terms of the flora in here, it's not as diverse as maybe we would like to see, or we would hope to see 100 years from now. But it's interesting nonetheless. When we get all the way in, you'll see there is an old well just before we go out into the salt marsh. There's a flag on that. And then when we get out in the salt marsh, on the far side of the little hillock that's there, there is actually a salt pond that's, if the tide goes out, you'll see it's actually above the level of the rest of the cove. So it's kind of interesting. I know there are some terns that have been feeding down there. There's oyster catcher down there. So we may see those this morning.